welcome to this fourth webcast of Governance Dialogues, a program curated by Governance Center. My name is Alissa, Kole, and I'm the Managing Director of Governance Center, a think tank and advisory firm that works with corporate and public sector leaders on advancing corporate and economic governance priorities. And in our observation, our work with our clients and discussions with policymakers worldwide, it seems to me that corporate governance is often seen as a technical, esoteric concept. And seen as somewhat of a dreary discipline that relates boards to management, to shareholders, to stakeholders. But is it really? If you look at the events that have transpired in the capitals, from Santiago to Paris to New York, and the enormous grievances that were manifested by citizens all over the world, it seems to me that corporate governance actually lies at the heart of these grievances, at the heart of the model of wealth distribution, at the heart of the model of the economic and capitalist system as it exists today. And this is precisely the reason why we would like to explore in greater depth the concept of corporate governance in conversations with thought leaders, both in the public and private sectors, and bring you their perspectives and their insight. And obviously, the key undercurrent in these conversations in the last 2 months is how the current crisis is reshaping the corporate world, and with it, the world of corporate governance. And understandably, in the last 2 months, what we've seen is an enormous focus on listed companies and on state-owned enterprises as governments are basically forced to rescue a number of them. And by the way, the line between state-owned and private companies is increasingly blurring. Already before the current crisis, governments were shareholders in approximately 14% of the world's listed companies. And this is becoming increasingly prevalent as we explore in some of our recent research and in an article that I published last week called From Golden Shares to Golden Parachutes. And yet there is one type of company that has eluded, if I may, the debate so far on governance, and that is an FOE. But what is an FOE? And in fact, what's interesting is that family-owned companies account for 90% of the world's enterprises. And some of them, many of them, are actually systemically important, a term that has emerged basically post the last financial crisis when governments had to rescue a number of financial institutions. And in today's webcast, we would like to offer you a more in-depth perspective into family-owned enterprises, which we believe are critical for the future of the world economy for a number of reasons. If we look at the public markets, strategic investors and private companies are invested in about 18% of the world's listed companies. And actually, many of the family-owned companies outperform their state-owned and their private peers, whether we look at markets such as UK, Canada, or many others. So we do think that there is a number of reasons to look at family-owned companies and their governance, because we have something to learn from them, but also because they do have their own corporate governance health problems. And oftentimes, in our experience, those health problems stem from the challenges for families to differentiate between their corporate, their private, and their philanthropic interests. And that challenge generally manifests itself in two particular respects. One is in terms of the composition of corporate boards, and the second is succession planning. And if you look at family-owned companies, approximately only 12% of them are able to make it to the third generation, and only 3% to the fourth generation. So I think it makes all the more interesting that we're here today, joined from Dubai, the UAE, a representative of a family that has made it through many generations, and that continues to thrive and succeed. Mishal Kanoo, the chairman of Kanoo Group. Mishal, ahlan wa sahlan for Governance Dialogues.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time to share the perspective of your family and how it's navigated through the generations and how it's grown its business from rather humble beginnings at the end of the 19th century in Bahrain, then to Saudi, to UAE, and now to the world, where your company, if I have the numbers correct, employs approximately 1,200 employees worldwide. And in the current crisis, obviously the challenges of running a family company, but any other companies, of course, are accentuated. So we would like to turn to you and ask you a few questions, if we may, around how you've improved the governance of your company. What are the challenges that you're seeing today emerge for family-owned companies, and perhaps benefit from some of your wisdom on that front. So with that, if I may start with the first question around the governance of your own company, Kanoo Group. What are some of the challenges you faced along the way? Now it's 125 years, I believe, in operation. And what are the main steps that you've taken to improve and to address governance in your own firm?
Actually, we've crossed, this year, 2020 will be 130 years as a company. The origination in terms of structure, in terms of governance and how things were separated from family and business actually stems from the early 60s with the my late uncle, Ahmed, who was the chairman of the group. And he very clearly understood, in conjunction with his brothers and his cousins who made up the company shareholding, we need to have a clear delineation marker between what is the company and what is the family. And we brought in professional managers who came in specifically for the idea of they're the ones who are going to help us delineate between what is a requirement of the family and what is a requirement of the business. And by not allowing the business to be tainted necessarily with family issues, we tried to segregate that as much as possible. Now, again, as every family business, no matter how much you try, the family issues and the business issues will somehow merge with one another. You try constantly to segregate the two, but they will, again, somehow pop in between one another. That is nothing anyone can do about in any business. You can try, but as long as there's a family component in the management, in the ownership, where they have a significant position, we're not talking small positions, but significant position, you will always have an overlap between the two. The job of the board, the job of the chairman, and the job of the business as a whole is to try to segregate the two, where you have the business on one hand, enacting whatever is the requirements of the business, and the family being put aside in terms of having their own office, a family, whether it's a family office, family constitution, family conferences, and family assembly, which puts the family issues and handles the family issues as a separate entity. That is the goal.
That is the goal. Let me ask you sort of on this specific issue, which I think is a particular pain point for family companies, and there are countless conferences and research dedicated to this. If we look at the Middle East, where you currently sit, I mean, it is a challenge for companies worldwide, but I would tend to think, based on our work with clients and what I observed in the region over the last 15 years, that it's even more pronounced issue in the Gulf, in a sense that family companies are very much reluctant to appoint non-family members on their board. I'm thinking of one example, which is Majd Al-Futtaim, which has done so for a number of years now. But there is a deep-seated reluctance to do so in, I think, most family companies. And it's indeed a key reason for why many of them are not really interested to tap into the capital markets in the region, which has been another subject of discussion. Do you have any perspectives or thoughts on this front?
Yes. Where does one begin on this point? The problem we have stems from the idea we're very tribal. And tribal relies on trust and, to a certain degree, secrecy. If you don't have the secrecy and the trust, you're not going to be able to do much in a tribal setting. That's the first part. The second part is it takes a long time for people to believe in you, that you can actually fulfill exactly what you're supposed to do. And if you are a foreigner and a foreign body, be it a CEO, CFO, anyways, because you are a foreign body to them, to this tribal setting, you're going to be put through a test of fire. Mm. And if you have a body that is headed by one person, the head of the tribe, and that head of the tribe gives a thumbs up to this person, then everybody else will join in on board, if the person is the head of the tribe. Problem is, as you go from generation to generation to generation, you end up having several little tribes within a tribe.
Absolutely.
And each one of them has a head within that tribe. And each of those tribe heads is trying to vie to be the head of the tribes. And everyone else who interacts with them will suffer because you don't know who you're going to support. You're going to support this person or that person. Who's going to end up being the head of the tribe? And in some cases, it's so vague that no matter how much you side with one person, there are 3 or 4 other people who think that they are also the head of the tribe. And they will fight and create problems because they think they should be the head of the tribe. It's hard for somebody who's not living this to understand exactly what I'm talking about. Because if you're living in a place where you have a clear delineation between what is business and what is family, it becomes easier to understand. This is the person I follow in the family. This is the person I follow in the business, because you have direct lines that tell you exactly who's who and what's what. In a tribal setting, you have to understand the nuances and to read between the lines. And if you cannot read between the lines, you're going to say something which you think is true, because it might be true to you, but it's not what the other people want to hear. And that will be the beginning of your death in that setting. How to overcome this? I describe this in this way. Forgive me if I'm going to use an expression which might sound a bit derogative, but it's not. For the people who think it's derogative, it's not derogative, but for people who think it's not derogative, it actually is derogative. I delineate the world in two separate spheres. You have North European sphere and the rest. The North European sphere, this is not necessarily just Europe, but it's anyone who takes the same mentality as a North European sphere. It could be the US, Canada, Australia, etc. They have a very simple concept. And the concept is, I will tell you exactly what I think because I don't have to like you, but I will work with you within a certain sphere. And I will tell you exactly what I think because this is the way things have to work for us to move forward. And then the rest of the world will not tell you that. They will expect you to be able to read between the lines because that gives them an excuse when things go wrong. I'm sorry, I'm taking a bit long on this one. But the question you asked is a very long question. But the reason I give you a vague answer, so a vague ability to read between the lines, it means I have also the ability, so when something goes wrong, I can say, well, you didn't understand what I was saying. If you put things in writing, which is what companies want and companies look for and what governance looks for, put things in writing, apply rules and regulations in writing, it becomes very hard for people to wiggle out of situations. This is why you find in places where it's more oral tradition, it's easier for them to have less governance because it gives them the wiggle room. If something goes wrong or it doesn't go in the right direction that they want, to say, it wasn't me.
Absolutely. And I think you're pointing to a very complicated issue, and one that indeed, as you point out correctly, merits hours of discussion. And that is the combination or the interface between culture and governance. And I'm often amazed when I speak and attend at governance events how, let's call them Western or Occidental governance concepts are often imported in the region and sort of plugged from one jurisdiction to another, from US or the UK into local laws. And sometimes, it works, and in many other times it just doesn't. And therefore breeds, and we discussed this in previous conversations, confusions. For example, we spoke about the fact that in the US, the corporation is a moral person. In the region, the division of responsibilities between personal and corporate tends to be confused due to some of this importation of concepts. So for example, when we spoke about the concept of zakat and how businessmen or people are responsible for sort of paying it as individuals as opposed to corporations. And there are many other examples where the importation of global governance rule has not worked out so well. What are your thoughts on this front? Are there some issues that still need to be reconciled? And what are the key issues that need to be focused on?
Actually, what you brought up is a very important question, a very important point. The region, I'm talking purely from a regional perspective because that's where I interact with all the time. We want to move towards a more structured organization, structured ideas. but it comes in conflict exactly with what you're saying in terms of what is the culture. The culture is a very tribal mentality, and organizations supersede that of a tribal mentality, a tribal structure. And so you have this clash that's happening between the two constantly. And in a boardroom, we're trying to live a cultural idea where I'm taking my outside lifestyle and applying it in something where it's very restrictive because of the rules and regulations we put on board. From where I am, where we live, it's a very oral tradition. And the reason oral tradition works, as I said before in the previous question, is because I have the ability to circumvent and find my way. If something goes wrong or doesn't go in the right direction, I can utilize aspects of it. But when things are put down in writing, as in a proper governance, it restricts me. And when it restricts me, I can no longer find ways out. This is an issue a lot of companies and a lot of, whether it's family businesses or otherwise, in this region find very troubling, because it says, here's the box, and you live within that box, and you cannot circumvent that box. Whereas the reality of the culture says, the box is a nice idea. And to put it in a very simple way, if I was working in certain parts of Europe, States, Australia, if you said, come to me at 10 o'clock, I'm expected to be there a bit before so that I'm there at the meeting at 10 o'clock. But in our parts of the world, 10 o'clock is an idea. 10-ish, 10:15, 10:45, but within the sphere. It's acceptable.
Yes. Unfortunately, I am familiar with the fluid concept of time, but I think you do point out to this concept of a box, and it's important in the governance discourse. So what we've seen in the region, and I've been part of this debate for 15 or 20 years. At the beginning of 2000, as little as 20 years ago, there was nothing written or codified. There was no box in the region in terms of governance rules and regulations. It only started in about 2002 with Oman introducing its corporate governance code. And now basically all the countries in the region have, in my view, quite sophisticated regulations. And frankly, I'm always surprised how investors or outside stakeholders outside the region are not really aware. They imagine that there are no such rules and regulations, but they do exist, and they are quite sophisticated. And yet, if we look at public markets, and this is a little bit stepping away from the family enterprise box, but I think it's very important for the regional reputation. We've seen a number of recent scandals in the UAE, but also in other countries. We've had Drake and Skull, we had the Abraj scandal. For those of you who don't know, Abraj is a $6 billion private equity firm that collapsed. We recently have, and it's spilling over the pages of the financial press, the NMC case, an Emirati company, medical company, largest healthcare provider, listed in London, which is going through a major governance collapse. And I wonder if I can ask you for your thoughts as to, what are some of the underlying reasons that these collapses have occurred, and what are your thoughts as to how they can perhaps be mitigated going forward?
Of the companies you mentioned, I believe Drake and Skull was one, Abraj was the other, and NMC was the third. Correct? Okay. Apart from Drake and Skull, which I'll put aside because it's a very local company, Abraj was as international as you're going to get as far as a private equity company is concerned. It had listings all over the place. It was under the scrutiny of several jurisdictions. NMC is a company that was listed on the LSE. The question is always going to be, unfortunately, the number of companies you see here that are being questioned about I'm not saying that they're not guilty of what they've done. I have no idea. In some cases they are, in some cases they're not. But of all those companies you mentioned, there are a handful, or maybe let's say 2 handfuls. If I look across the world, across the globe, and including countries where international companies are come under a lot of scrutiny and rules and regulations, and whether it's in the US, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in Hong Kong, whether it's Singapore, how many of them have fallen in such dire straits and have done as bad as these companies have done? The problem has nothing to do with necessarily a geographical area. It has to do with the system that is being utilized by everyone. If I have ratings agencies that are full of you know what, and they're rubbish, and I'm saying that clearly, and I don't care if they hear me, because they're rubbish. They say exactly what you want them to say because you're paying them to say that. If I have accounting agencies, accounting companies whose job is to be your voice, and the only time they say, no, we don't do this, is because they're afraid they're being held accountable. Again, depending on how much you're paying them, then all of a sudden they're willing to bend the rules. So if I have the regulatory body who cannot keep up with it because there are too little a number of people that are there overlooking this. I mean, the policemen are so small compared to the criminals. If I have the financial auditing companies who are not doing what they're supposed to do and saying, oh, I'm sorry, I'm limited to my scope. Excuse me, your job is to ensure the shareholders, the stakeholders, and everybody else, and regulators included, that everything here is right. But yeah, no, it has nothing to do with me. And then you have the rating agency who says, well, based on the information I got, well, if that's the case, then I don't need you. But if you have all of these systems failing, what recourse does the stakeholder or shareholder or the regulatory body can do? What is it possible for them to do? The thing is, unfortunately, because these have become large in our region, there's a focus on them. But again, if I went to the UK, I went to the US, went to France, went to Germany, you pick any country you want, the number of companies we have experienced in terms of having problems like this versus those countries is minute.
It's true, and you're pointing to an important point, I think, and sort of enlarges the scope of our conversation from the Gulf to the world. And we discussed this in previous occasions, you know, trying to answer the question, how come not enough was done after the last financial crisis? So this is indeed one of the key areas that is on top of mind for policymakers and for corporate leaders. And I would like to ask you what your thoughts as to why not enough was done after the last financial crisis. How come we're now 10 years down the line facing some of the same questions around proxy voting agencies, around auditors, and without really a watershed change, as we have seen a watershed crisis 10 years ago?
It simply stems from a very simple idea. And I hate saying this, but I have an acronym that I use this. It's STP, which is screw the poor. It doesn't matter. If you're rich, if you have the ability to control things and get things done, it doesn't matter what you do. Out of those, the CEOs of the companies in the 2008, 2009 debacle that happened, the financial debacle, not a single one of them, forget about going to jail, paid a fine, got his image damaged. Nothing happened to them. Now, when you look at this and you think, this is a person who got away with, well, let's face it, the destruction of a financial system. And he, or in this case, I didn't see any she there. Oh. And they got away scot-free. This is in the US, let alone what happened in Europe. Again, most of them got away scot-free. Nothing happened to them. Now, if that doesn't encourage theft and lies and cheats, what does? If I feel that there's no punishment for me, now let a poor person steal some bananas from a grocer, they will want to take him and lock him and throw him in jail. But let somebody steal 10 million crates of bananas, if he does it right, he might get a slap on the hand. He might get a very soft term, and then he goes back and he can own the bananas that he stole. But if the system is structured in such a manner, it encourages people to do bad because we're telling them, you do bad, you don't pay for it. You do good, and guess what? You might get a reward, you might not get a reward. We have, if there is going to be a change that we want to see as stakeholders, global stakeholders, there has to be accountability. There has to be, I'm sorry saying this, prison sentences. There has to be, visual, vocal, and loud and in your face, and people need to be seen that if you do wrong, you're going to pay for it. If you don't do, if this is not done, we will have the same thing repeated again and again. And in fact, we're going to have it on a larger scale as we're seeing currently today. There's an example of a gentleman, I'm not going to mention his name, but there's a hedge fund manager who cried, he cried saying, oh my God, the world's going to hell in a handbasket because he shorted so many companies. And when the things went up, he became within 2 weeks, he became the ultimate optimist, and the world's great and fantastic. Sorry? If this isn't cheating the system and getting away with it, what is? But that's what he did.
It's interesting you talk about shorting, because in the region, the market regulators have avoided allowing of shorting of stocks. But that's perhaps a whole different conversation. But I like
the shorting issue here in this region. The reason why shorting is seen as a negative, it has to do with a religious aspect, and rightly so, by the way, from my perspective.
So, but I'd like to go back to your point about the bananas and the crates of bananas, because I think it's exactly on point. And with a little bit of a forward perspective, as we close today's episode, and perhaps focus on some of the challenges going forward. And we've discussed these challenges in previous conversations around the concept of ESG, around what companies are expected to do. And this is also a topic that I've been discussing with other thought leaders in this program, and particularly on the S side, the fact that worldwide there are thousands and millions of employees being let go all over the world in a very rapid fashion. And there are very few companies, I mean, for example, Marriott, there's Lululemon in Canada, and a few others where they've come out and said, we will sacrifice as our board and management some of our executive compensation in order to keep on our staff. And others have made, Visa, I think, has made commitments around how long they will keep their employees on board in this crisis. And I would like to just ask you in two sentences, if you can just share a few thoughts about how family companies, how is your own company sort of facing this challenge in the sense of having to balance employee rights and the importance of keeping people on the payroll and providing some security and health coverage and whatnot, and the enormous economic destruction that is currently going on?
Well, first, I can't expect others to do what I won't do. So for me, if I'm asking people to take a salary cut, then I will take a bigger salary cut, and I make sure they know I'm taking a bigger salary cut. Not because I want people to hear it, it's because I want them to know I'm in the same boat with you. And I'm going to feel more pain than you, because at the end of the day, I'm responsible. The reason I am the boss is because I'm responsible for you. And if I'm not willing to take the cut, I can't ask it from you. That's the first thing. Second thing, within my own, for example, my own personal family office that I have separate. The structure we have is that, okay, we're going to take a haircut for a month or two, but I'm going to say, if by the end of the year things have turned positive, the money that was taken from you will be given back to you. So there's an opportunity for you to want to strive and do more. I want you to feel like everyone, I as an employer want my employees to feel we are in this together. We are going to feel the pain together. I think those companies who release, there are some who will do this. There are some who deserve to go, by the way, let's face it. In some businesses, there are people who deserve to go. But for those who are the key to your organization, not only to encourage them by finding ways to make them stay, but also to say, you know what, this is an opportunity. If you find ways to create and do better, you know what, I'm going to reward you even more, because I want you and I want you on board, and I respect what you've done, and I'm not going to discount you. And the older the person is, this is an issue also within family businesses and others, but the older a person is, the more you should think about not letting them go than the younger one. And the reason I say that, and not because the younger ones are important, but because the younger one can find a job down the road. Somebody in his or her 40s, 50s, or even 60s, well, once you let them go, the chances of them finding a job becomes slim to none. And we do have a responsibility towards them. Let's face it, a business is only as good as the people I was in. If I don't have good people around me, I don't have a business. I really don't have a business. My business is people. If I take care of my people, the business will flow it might be a blip today, but the business will flow. I need good people, and I need to surround myself with people who are supportive, who enjoy what they're doing, and want to do even more, not because I'm over there as an overseer overlooking them, but because they feel that they're helping build something special for them.
Thank you so much, Mishal, for that perspective. I think we'll continue talking about the importance of human resources and corporate governance in future dialogues. But for the purpose of today's conversation, I would like to thank you so much for joining us directly from Dubai, sorry. But it's close. And thank our audience for joining us for today's fascinating discussion around family governance, a topic which we'll be discussing further in future episodes of Governance Dialogues. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, and I wish you the very best in your project.
Thank you. Ma salam.
Ma salam.